Bran Stark is one of the most mysterious characters of Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire. In a shocking twist, the finale of Game of Thrones ended with Bran Stark ruling the 6 kingdoms of Westeros. This was genuinely shocking to many fans, and in this video, I will explain how this very scenario may have been foreshadowed all along by the show, but also the greater implications it has on the story as a whole. Hello, my sweet summer children. This video will contain book spoilers from all of the published works of George R.R. Martin and the entire series of Game of Thrones. The show Game of Thrones soared past the books. In the books, Bran is still in the cave training to become a green seer. In the show, Bran actually becomes the Three-Eyed Raven. Mira manages to get Bran to Winterfell and they prepare to fight the White Walkers. The Night King's target is Bran. Bran survives, and then basically Bran ends up ruling the 6 kingdoms. But is this going to happen in the books? I think it's highly likely that some scenario like this will happen because Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire are supposed to be 2 roads that lead to the same castle. But I'm not certain what the implications of that are, and I want to talk about that here and try to explain why it is likely the same in the books and why, after much thought, I think it's actually good. The very first chapter of A Song of Ice and Fire is Bran 1. It's from Bran's point of view, and it's the chapter that started everything. Be sure to check out the Obsidian Nights podcast, Ideas of Ice and Fire, and myself are doing a podcast reread of the entire A Song of Ice and Fire series. The prologue is out, and Bran 1 will be out on Sunday. So in the books and on the show, I've always thought that Bran was important, but I've always thought that his importance was tied to the White Walkers and more to the supernatural, magical side of the story. The show, Game of Thrones, has the Three-Eyed Raven. In the books, he's the Three-Eyed Crow. One of the biggest obstacles for me when trying to explain Bran is how true is the show version of the Three-Eyed Raven and all of the details that we learn about the Three-Eyed Raven. How true are they? Did the show specifically change the title, The Three-Eyed Raven, from The Three-Eyed Crow because they intended to make changes to the character? For example, when the show changed Robb Stark's lover from Jean Westerling, a Lannister bannerman, to a lady from Volantis, George told Dan and Dave, since it's not the same character, to change the name, and that's how we got Talisa.
My contribution when I got that, I looked at, they made her a noblewoman from Volantis and all of this stuff, and I said, well, okay, but don't call her Jane anymore. Jane is not a Volantine name.
So is there some implications there that the show Three-Eyed Raven and the book Three-Eyed Crow are going to be different in some way? Another obstacle is the Children of the Forest. What are their true intentions? Did they trick a boy into giving up his body so that they could take power of the people who basically destroyed their race? Whatever the case may be, the Bran Stark that ends up ruling Westeros in the show is not really Bran Stark.
And I would still be Brandon Stark.
You're not?
No. I'm something else now.
Bran Stark doesn't even have the Stark sigil on the armor of his Kingsguard. His sigil is a raven, a three-eyed raven. His sigil is very similar to the Night King's sigil, which is a raven skull, which kind of further highlights that beef between the three-eyed raven and the Night King. The Night King's sigil is basically a dead raven. But the point is, nothing about Bran that we see in the final episode is the Brandon Stark of Winterfell that we knew many seasons ago. His clothes are raven black, his sigil is a raven, there isn't any kind of direwolf Stark sigil in sight. We have countless interactions with Bran after he becomes the Three-Eyed Raven that don't paint him as entirely human. Every interaction that he has had with a member of his family has been emotionless and creepy. We learned from the showrunners that the Three-Eyed Raven isn't just a title, and the Three-Eyed Raven isn't entirely human.
The Three-Eyed Raven is not just a title that you get. There's a part of him that's no longer Brandon Stark, but is the Three-Eyed Raven, and the Three-Eyed Raven is not, entirely human.
And this makes sense when you look at Bran because he doesn't act human or have human emotions. If you really think about it, emotions are literally what makes you human. When Bran is first reunited with Sansa, he doesn't smile, he doesn't cry, he doesn't frown, he doesn't budge. The contrast between two humans, Sansa and Jon, reuniting and Bran and Sansa reuniting is tremendous. It's night and day. The same can be said with Bran's reunion with Arya and his reunion with Jon. They were all emotionless.
You're a man.
Almost.
Also, he doesn't display any emotions when he sees Jaime. Jaime pushed him from a window and crippled him as a boy. The normal human reaction would be anger, but he has no anger because he has no emotion. The same with Littlefinger. Littlefinger is responsible for a lot of what happened to Bran's family, and Bran knows this and has zero emotion about it. Bran and Mira have survived one of the most grueling quests in the world. Jojen has died for Bran. Summer and Hodor have died for Bran. Mira has saved his life and done him the biggest service in the world by dragging him all the way from Bloodraven's cave to the wall and getting him to Winterfell. And he shows no gratitude, no emotion, nothing. Mira comes to the conclusion that Bran died in the cave.
You died in that cave.
Which makes sense because the three-eyed raven isn't entirely human.
Bran.
I'm not really. Not anymore.
When Bran becomes the three-eyed raven, it is because the Night King has killed the other three-eyed raven. Isaac Hempstead Wright has said the Night King and the three-eyed raven are ancient enemies. Bloodraven isn't ancient. Becoming the three-eyed raven, this is some power, some entity, a shadow on the soul, a type of spirit that passes from one to the next. Every three-eyed raven that ever lived basically lives now in Bran. But in a nutshell, being the three-eyed raven is basically like being Google. You are a computer, like a search engine that holds history, and you can see the past, and you can see the future. Bran is holding all of the memories of the world. This download, this spiritual time bank that gets put into Bran's body seems to pass from Greenseer to Greenseer, three-eyed raven to three-eyed raven. So Bran is being trained by Bloodraven. Bloodraven is a very interesting character. He's also a very, very shady character. He's a sketchy character. I think he's probably a misunderstood character. He was Hand of the King to several kings. He put down some rebellions, killed some important people, and once it was said that he ruled the Seven Kingdoms in all but name. He's interesting, and his story is interesting, but none of his story is in the show at all. And not much of Bloodraven's story is in the 5 published A Song of Ice and Fire books. He's mentioned once in A Feast for Crows and twice in A Dance with Dragons. However, he is a huge part in the Tales of Dunk and Egg and also in the World Book of the History of Westeros. In the books, I could see the possibility building for George to maybe be planting some seeds about Bran becoming a Bloodravenish character, a Greenseer ruler. I'm going to be doing a complete video on Bloodraven because he is one of the most interesting historical Targaryens. The show has caught backlash for some of its decisions, but the foreshadowing for this on the show could have started in season 4, and here's why. Bran touches a weirwood tree and he realizes this is where he needs to go. He's being guided. He gets some visions, and we're going to talk about these visions, but before we do, I want to show you what D&D said way back in season 4 about these visions.
Every image in there does, it's there for a reason, and it does have some bearing on his story specifically.
So they say these visions were specifically selected for a reason, and it does have some bearing on his story specifically. Bran doesn't know what these visions mean because Bran hasn't had any training on what the sight is or how to control it. But according to D&D, the dragon flying over King's Landing was the most crucial shot.
Most crucial shot to us was the shadow of a dragon flying over King's Landing, and we don't know yet, is that from the past? Is it from the future?
Not only do we see Bran's fall and White Walkers and the Night King, but we also see the destroyed throne room and a dragon flying over Westeros, which we know now are shots from episode 5, The Bells, and episode 6, The Iron Throne. So was this something that was always slated to happen? And could Bran have stopped it? In season 4, Bran clearly didn't know what any of it meant. He makes it to the cave and he meets Bloodraven, the three-eyed raven, and he starts training. Bran is absent for the entirety of season 5, and I think there's a big disconnect from Bran and the audience because of that. So then season 6, he comes back, he's still training, his training is ended abruptly because the Night King touches him and he gets this massive download where these visions and images are just sinking to his body rapidly. As with the first time, all of these images are important. King's Landing again and again, the White Walkers, the Mad King, Jaime Lannister killing the Mad King, Daenerys Targaryen, the burn them all thing. He still can't control it though, and he still doesn't really know what any of it means. In season 7, when he gets to Winterfell, he tries to explain to Sansa what it means, what being the three-eyed raven means. And even here, he's still trying to see better.
It's all pieces now. Fragments. I need to learn to see better.
He still doesn't have it all figured out. He's just seeing fragments. In season 8, he definitely has a better grasp on his abilities. He's seen the visions of King's Landing multiple times. He's seen Daenerys in these visions. I think he knows what she's going to do to King's Landing. Bran's only interaction with Daenerys is hostile. Normally, when speaking with anyone, he is just plain and straight-faced, but this is the most emotion we see out of Bran since season 6. I think it is very likely that Bran knows what Daenerys plans to do, which ultimately makes us ask the question, is he just as bad for knowing what she would do and not stopping her or not telling anyone what was going to happen in King's Landing? Bran literally knew Daenerys was going to kill thousands of people, and he didn't say a word. I think he 100% knew, and I think he 100% knew where that would land him. But does that make Bran a villain? Being king isn't necessarily a prize. He says he doesn't want to be king.
And I don't want to be king.
But then he also says that being king is why he came all this way.
You lead the Seven Kingdoms to the best of your abilities, from this day until your last day.
Why do you think I came all this way?
He also says in season 7 that he can't be lord of anything.
I can never be Lord of Winterfell. I can never be Lord of anything. I'm the three-eyed raven.
But now he's king, and he chooses Lord Tyrion as his hand. Those things together make no damn sense. Bran is a very, very confusing character, and if you watch all of the Inside the Episodes D&D, they hardly ever address Bran, ever. After much contemplation and some rereading and thought, I can see why Bran was George R.R. Martin's choice. You have to ask yourself, what kind of story is George R.R. Martin trying to tell here? This is what he says. Thematically, power is at the center of this. The use of power, the corrupting influences of power, what people will do to get power, and what power will do to them. And it's about politics. It's not an allegory. People have occasionally asked me, is this an allegory for modern politics? No, it's not. I agree with Tolkien in the sense that you really don't want to inject any sort of allegory and satire or contemporary political issues into your medieval fantasy. But nonetheless, there are certain universal themes. There are certain things that I'm trying to say about politics, governance, the use of power, kings, and all of that stuff. There are many themes within the story, but George says power is at the center of this and the corruption of power. But there is also the thing about the human heart being in conflict with itself as good and evil fight inside of you, and heroes being villains of the other side and vice versa. Which brings us back to Brandon the Broken and why he will be a good king and why certain things had to happen. There are certain benefits to having an emotionless, robotic Google search engine as king. But at the same time, he's not entirely human. So is him not being entirely human what makes him the best choice? Is the real message that any human king or queen is unfit? Is the real message that even the characters that had the best intentions for people, even the morally good characters in this story can do evil things because humans are humans? Humans act on emotions. Humans act on fear, anger, love. How many characters throughout the story have thrown all sense out of the window and acted solely based on emotion? In Season 8, we witnessed one of the most morally good characters in the series commit genocide. It went against everything she believed in. In Episode 5, we see Daenerys Targaryen as we would have never thought to see her. She burned a city to the ground based on emotion. Jon Snow, another morally good character, kills Daenerys based on emotion. Emotion is human. Bran is not. Bran is something else. I think at the end of the day, the big message is that humans are our own worst enemy. And this aspect of it ties a lot together. Humans came to Westeros and they slaughtered the children of the forest. The children of the forest fought back. They made the White Walkers. The White Walkers slaughtered humans. The children of the forest eventually helped the humans defeat the White Walkers, but humans were always the problem. And as Ragnar would say, power attracts the worst and corrupts the best. George carefully set up Bran and Daenerys to contrast each other, but their journeys are very, very similar in the books. Daenerys gets wed to fire. Bran gets wed to the trees. I've done a whole video on this. I think the bottom line is that power will corrupt any human no matter how good they are. And Bran not being human is what makes him the best choice.
Falls into the mistake of assuming that the good man will be a good king. That is, all that is necessary is to be like a decent human being, and then when you're king, of course, everything will go swimmingly.
It's not something that he wanted. It's not something that he desired. It's something that he always was destined to obtain. While he might have known what Daenerys was going to do, he had to let it happen. It was a necessity to restore balance. It was Bran's red grass field. It was Bran's summer hall, and the wheel is finally broken. So while I was writing this, Eliana from Girls Gone Canon sent me an essay that someone had posted in 2015, and I'll link it below. A user named Sacred Order of the Green Men wrote an essay called The Stark in Winterfell, Bran and the Fisher King. And it's really, it's a really good essay, and it doesn't necessarily say that Bran will be king of Westeros, but it makes some very compelling arguments and has some very compelling evidence that George is heading in this direction, and the only fit king is a not human king. I think if this is the best message, that human monarchs are no good and power can corrupt the best people, and that was what the show was trying to convey with Bran, I'm not sure it was like executed the best, but what do you think? Do you think Bran the Broken, the Green Seer, Three-Eyed Raven King was always George's master plan for A Song of Ice and Fire? Let me know in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching. Thanks to everyone that supports me on Patreon. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please click that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and join the Sweet Summer family. Okay, my sweet summer children, have a good day.
Shame. Shame.